Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to a new episode of Chatting with Lady C. Hello, Mum, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, honey. And look who's joining us.
Yes.
Oh, yes, Mickey. Mickey, are you going to say hello to everybody?
Her ears look amazing.
Yes. She's had a nice trim, hasn't she?
Yes, got rid of the dreadlocks. All right. So we're going to start off today's questions. So for our first one today is from E. May. I have a question regarding Princess Diana. Was she really in love with the Doctor and staged the whole thing with Dodi to make the Doctor jealous?
Do you know, that's really interesting how many people actually think like that and have espoused that theory over the years. It's completely not so. Hasnat Khan himself has confirmed that Diana changed her phone, changed her number, didn't give it to him. So he is not really the one who ended it with her. She ended it with him once she met Dodi. Diana was in love with Hasnat Khan. Her marriage to him, had she married him, would have been an even bigger disaster than her marriage to the Prince of Wales was. And that's saying a lot, believe me. His family was dead against any question of any marriage with Diana. She was not Muslim. She was not Pakistani. She was never going to fit in. She was always going to be trouble. They liked her. And of course, they're a very good family, incidentally. I know various of the cousins. And they are Pakistan's version of aristocracy. And they are from an impeccable background. And of course, being from an impeccable background, they behaved towards her impeccably. But she was not blind to the fact that they were not crazy about her. And certainly he made it absolutely clear that there was no way that a marriage between them could ever take place and would ever work. And he was right. You know, Diana was actually, in many ways, she could be very unrealistic. And she could be the wiliest, most practitioner of manipulativeness, and she could be really very, very prescient, perspicacious. I mean, very knowing, hand on the pulse, eye on the ball. And then, so there was that side of Diana, very practical, very down to earth, able to move from A to C without you even realizing she's budged, while you are left with dust kicked up in your face and you're swallowing it and you think, what on earth ever went on? I mean, she was really very good like that, but she also, despite that, so that, I suppose what I'm trying to say, she had a very realistic and dispassionate way of dealing with things when she wanted something. Real sang-froid. Putting that aside, she also was extremely naive and extremely impractical and extremely romantic in the most bizarre sort of Barbara Cartland. I'm a 13-year-old who's, if I sit down long enough and hard enough, the prince with the golden coach is going to come and I don't need to do anything. I just need to want it. So there was that really unrealistic element to her personality as well. He managed to prevail. Joseph was very in on a lot of what went on. And Joseph and I used to talk about it, George's father and Anita's husband. Joseph Saunders, for those of you who don't know, was Diana's great friend, her financial advisor, her accountant, and they spoke 5 times a day, every day. And as Joseph used to say, she always asks for my advice and never takes it. But so through Joseph, I knew what was going on, even while it was happening. And there was no way Hasnat Khan was ever going to marry her. He made it absolutely clear to her that marriage was not on the cards. And when she finally woke up to the fact that, going to Pakistan, wearing salwar kameez and having her head wrapped in shawls, was going to gain her a lot of column inches, but where the Khan family was concerned, it was just not going to work. At that point, she dumped him and made off with Dodi. And it's almost as if she thought, well, that play is at an end. It's okay, new play, new production, new cast, and she made off with Dodi, and she was, all the romance and all the romanticism and all the realistic and unrealistic elements kicked in again. But this time with a big difference, because Hasnat Khan was a very dedicated doctor. He still is. You most likely don't remember it, but many years ago we were at the airport in first class and in the first class lounge. And Dr. Magdi Yaqub and I started to talk. He was Hasnat Khan's mentor. He's one of the most eminent heart surgeons in the world. And Hasnat Khan is one of the finest heart surgeons on earth. I mean, that's the caliber of man. And Diana loved to admire somebody like that. And, it appealed to her humanitarian instincts. And, I'm in love with somebody who's helping to save the world and doing a lot of good. All of which was very nice and noble. But with Dodi, it was just such a relief. I can fly in private planes. I can go on private yachts. I don't need to do it through the royal family. I can do it through my boyfriend and his family. And she was ecstatic. She loved toys. She loved all the toys. And no harm with that, eh? I mean, it's perfectly natural that she liked. But I never met Dodi. But for instance, Aunt Lorraine knew Dodi all his life virtually. And Dodi was always at Grey Hall when Bernie was alive. This is Bernie Kornfeld, for those of you who don't know. Bernie Kornfeld was the ex-husband of a great friend of ours who was one of the richest men on earth. And he owned Grey Hall, the original mansion built by Douglas Fairbanks and Senior and Mary Pickford, and what is now Beverly Hills. It was their estate. And Dodi was a really sweet guy, but he was very loving, and whether the marriage would have lasted or not, who knows? I mean, it's all pointless speculation, but I do know as a fact that they were discussing marriage, which I've discussed elsewhere. And if anybody wants to know the nitty-gritty and all of the details, I would recommend you read it all in The Real Diana. So, does that answer the question, do you think?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. All right. So for our next question today is from Alan Joseph. Lady Scene. Please can I ask you, did you ever meet Joan Collins or her sister Jackie? Did you think Joan is an amazing woman?
Ah, I have met Joan Collins, and I will make it quite clear right now that the first time I met Joan Collins, I liked her enormously. And the second time I met her, I thought, if I never see that woman ever again, that will be fine by me. Jackie I met once at Tramp years and decades ago because her husband was one of the owners of Tramp. And I used to go to Tramp quite a lot in the 70s. And I think it was into the 80s. But anyway, the first time I met Joan Collins was very interesting. She was one of the guests of honor at an opera and ballet gala that I sat on the committee of and that Alan Sivright helped to organize. You know, Shaquille and Martin's good friend. He was one of the top impresarios. And if I remember correctly, yes, it was for kids. It was for kids. Which was Penny Northampton's charity for children. Spenny Northampton is the Marquis of Northampton. And Anne Cameron Webb was the chairman, and I was on the fundraising committee, and we were all great, great friends. And Anne said to me, could I tuck Joan Collins under my arm and take care of her for the evening? Because she was going to be busy taking care of Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, who had only recently been married. And Joan Collins was absolutely sweet. This was before she was in Dynasty, by the way. So she was still a name, something of a star, but she was really not in the first firmament any longer. And she came with her husband at the time called Ron Cass. And I remember they were very good and sporting because her daughter had been involved in a serious accident and they were actually living in a caravan outside of the hospital. And he left in the interval to go back to be on parental duty with the daughter, who they knew she was going to make it, but they knew that she was brain damaged and they didn't know to what extent. And I thought it was very sporting of Joan Collins to show up under those circumstances. She looked great. I remember what she had on. She had on a pencil slim navy blue long skirt and a sequined midnight blue top, and which was perfectly correct because it was not a ball and you do not wear huge ball gowns, as you will know, to the theatre you wear, and it was at the Coliseum. She told us all about what was happening with her daughter, and she was really a great sport about it all and showed exemplary braveness in the face of adversity. She was also very down to earth because she had not yet done Dynasty and success hadn't turned her head the way it did. Because I remember in the interval, she was saying to me, "Oh, can we?" No, it can't have been the interval. It must have been at the beginning of the evening. Must have been at the beginning of the evening. "Can I rehearse her curtsying?" I said, "Well, you've curtsied 1,000 times. You?" "No, no, no," she said. "I'm an actress. I need to rehearse." And she had me, she's curtsying to me, and then, but she actually made me show her how to curtsy as well. I said, "But you know how to curtsy." She said again, she was really great. And she duly met Prince and Princess Michael, and uh, you know, Princess Michael was being very much sort of her typical self. "I'm the most important person in the room." And Joan was actually sort of, "Well, I'm delighted that you're the most important person in the room, but I mean, I'm a star too." And so there was all of that going on, but it was all endearing. So that's the first time I met her. Second time I met her was at the end of Dynasty, and my stepmother-in-law, Margaret Argyll, wanted the story of her life to be made, and there was the prospect of a television company doing a mini-series were all the rage in those days, on Margaret's life. And Margaret said to me, "It's really important. Joan Collins is coming for drinks, so I'm having a few people over." And, this, by then Margaret was living at the Grosvenor House. And she said, "Oh, will you come and, sort of oil the wheels, so to speak?" So I said, "Of course," and I was delighted to do it. And Joan Collins, I remember she looked absolutely fabulous. She has really beautiful skin, and she is a beautiful woman. I mean, this would have been, say, 30 years ago. So she would have been in her 50s. She looked absolutely wonderful. She had on a white ruched satin dress and big white earrings and beautiful face, slim figure, vulgar, vulgar, vulgar. The look was so vulgar, but very Hollywood, but not Hollywood grand, Hollywood tasteless. Okay, that's fair dues. Doesn't matter. We started to speak, and it very quickly became apparent to me that she was tripping on how important she was and how grand she was. I don't know if this was because she just left Dynasty, or it was because she was going to be playing a duchess. Who, let's remember, she's speaking to me, and that duchess is my stepmother-in-law. But she was so... And finally, I could take it no more. I said, "You're absolutely the most insufferable woman I've ever come across," and stormed off. With Charles Beresford, who was a friend of Margaret's, in hot pursuit of me because he'd overheard. He said, Georgie, oh, please don't. Margaret's going to be so cross." I said, "I don't care." I said, "This woman is insupportable." And she said, "Yeah, but suppose you scupper things for Margaret." I said, "Scupper things for Margaret? With that?" I said, "The idea of that, playing a duchess. Look at the way she walks." And I will not say what I said, because it would cause problems for me to say it on YouTube, because it would fall foul of their descriptive acts. But I can tell you something. I did make the point that Joan Collins, with that walk of hers, as she waddles like oh, an over-egged duck would have made a laughable duchess. I actually found her so offensive. I can still feel how offensive she was. And I just thought, I'm not putting up with it. In fact, Margaret didn't mind at all if she knew. I don't remember now if she knew or not. But she certainly didn't recriminate if she knew. And nothing came of it. But the idea of Margaret, Duchess of Argyll, being played by Joan Collins was, I mean, really, that was like a pig playing a rabbit. So that's my Joan Collins story. And Jackie I only met briefly, and she seemed perfectly pleasant. I mean, just a nice regular woman. Nothing to report one way or the other. So, is that interesting?
Yes, it was.
It was. Good. Next
Right.
question.
So for our next question, it is from Jessica Ramachan. Did you, Lady C, ever meet Stephen Ward or the Profumo Affair? Do you think he was framed?
Stephen Ward died in 1963 when I was 13. So, no, I never met Stephen Ward. I have absolutely no doubt that Stephen Ward was framed. I think the way he was treated was a disgrace. It was abominable. He was thrown to the wolves. He was a sacrificial lamb. It was over the Profumo Affair, which you might not know about, but I think people of a certain age will know about it. It was the greatest sex scandal of the 20th century. It brought down the Conservative government ultimately. He was a very fine portrait painter. He did loads of people. He did Princess Alexandra, Princess Margaret, Prince Philip. He was a very, very fine portrait painter. He was also an osteopath, and he was evidently a genius at osteopathy. He could cure people or relieve people's pain in the most dramatic way. He was one of those men about town who, he was from a nice upper middle class background. He wasn't grand, but he was a gentleman, and he behaved as if he was a gentleman, but a sort of naughty gentleman. And he liked dolly birds. I gather he rather liked looking as opposed to doing. And if he did, it was very occasional. But he used to take pretty young things under his wing, not upper class girls, working class girls, and sort of be a little bit of turn them into something else, almost a Professor Higgins type. Polish them up, set them on their way. He seems to have been a perfectly pleasant individual, and he used to enjoy being around. He used to enjoy being around young people, especially young girls. And he ended up with two girls living with him, Mandy Rice Davis and Christine Keeler. And when the Profumo scandal started, they were good time girls. They were accused of being professionals, and they were not professionals. They gave it away. They never took money for it. Mandy Rice Davies had been the mistress of Rackman, who was a famous, well, really an infamous rack renter. He owned, he owned all sorts of slums, and he died of a heart attack very young. And she actually ended up with no money whatsoever because, you know, he used to support her. And Christine Keeler was just a good time girl. She was a show girl who, you know, used to strip for a living. But they were not the sort of people we would have mixed with in our world. But, you know, the sort of people that men, when they wanted a bit of fun, which in those days, sometimes men had to get not from nice girls, they got from other girls. And he was accused of living off immoral earnings, and the immoral earnings of these two girls, both of whom he used to help to support. They didn't support him. It was a terrible injustice. And there have been movies made about it. And I think the British legal system can hang its head in shame at what they did to him, because it was a complete stitch up, and he committed suicide rather than go to prison. He committed suicide. Terrible, terrible. And funnily enough, somebody else I noticed asked the question, did I think that Gillan Maxwell is possibly today's Stephen Ward? And I would hope, for all our sakes, that she is not. And more than that, I will not say, because I actually do believe in due process. And I believe that anybody who's charged with a serious crime deserves a fair trial. And I also believe that it is incumbent upon all of us to regard everybody who's charged with a crime as innocent until they are proven guilty. But it's interesting that that question also arose. Is that interesting?
Yes, it was. I didn't know who this gentleman was, so yeah.
Yeah. I remember several years ago I was at Christie's, South Ken, going to buy some of his pictures which had come up for sale. Beautiful pictures. And somebody from the palace came, and they were withdrawn, and the pictures have never seen the light of day. They were of various royals.
Yeah.
Any other questions today?
No, that was our last one.
Well, actually, can I say something before? I made a mistake in one of the videos recently when I said that Jackie Kennedy saved the Metropolitan Opera House. She didn't.
Okay.
She saved Grand Central Station.
Okay.
Because, of course, she got interested because the Metropolitan Opera House was pulled down, and it has been relocated to what is now Lincoln Center. And I was wrong.
So Central Station.
So it was Grand Central Station that she saved, because they had pulled down Penn Central Station, Pennsylvania's, the Penn Central Station, which is now on its 34th. They pulled it down in, I think, the early 60s. And it was a very beautiful building. And when they wanted to actually effectively destroy Grand Central Station by overshadowing it entirely, she got involved with the campaign to preserve Grand Central Station, which they did. Okay. So I think I stand corrected. I made a mistake.
It
Can you
happens.
believe it?
Yeah.
How do you mean it happens? Your mommy is not perfect. I'm so upset. I'm not perfect. Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thank you, everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you very much, and goodbye. And
Sorry, honey. And please keep the questions coming in.
no worries. Well, thank you. Bye-bye.